Okay, so history of Earth's atmosphere. Earth seems to be formed about 5 billion years ago. That's rounded, of course. But, reading from the left, Earth is believed to have formed about 5 billion years ago. In the first 500 million years, a dense atmosphere emerged from the vapor and gases were expelled during the degassing of the planet's interior. These gases may have consisted of hydrogen, water vapor, methane, and carbon dioxides. Carbon oxides, which are carbon oxides, carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide. So, in other words, 5 billion years ago, volcanoes released gases from the inside of the Earth, and the composition of the air was methane, CO2, water, nitrogen. That's simplified a little bit, but the important thing is there's no oxygen there. There's nobody breathing anything. Oxygen is all locked up in CO2, stuff like that mostly. Moving on. The hydrosphere was formed 4 billion years ago from the condensation of water vapor, resulting in oceans of water in which sedimentation occurred. What is that implying, sedimentation? What kind of rocks are we going to see there? Sedimentary rocks, yeah. So, 4 billion years ago, the hydrosphere, or the water cycle, started forming. Basically, the Earth had cooled off for water. Life was first spotted in the oceans at this. So, life was first spotted in the oceans. The most important feature in the ancient environment was the absence, or that there was no free oxygen. Evidence of such anaerobic reducing atmosphere is hidden in early rock formations. This is to say, the atmosphere didn't have any oxygen in it. Anaerobic means without oxygen. And that's what we see in the rocks. So, early rock formations that contain many elements such as iron and uranium in their reduced states. Elements in this state are not found in the rocks of mid-Precambrian or younger ages, less than 3 billion years old. So in other words, the chemical reactions we see that happen in those rocks happened without any oxygen at all. 3 billion years ago, early aquatic organisms called blue gene algae began using their energy from the sun to split molecules of H2O and CO2 and recombine them into molecular organic compounds and molecular oxygen. Here's the first oxygen showing up on Earth. This solar energy conversion process is known as photosynthesis. So at 3 billion years ago, in comes photosynthesis. Organisms that do photosynthesis begin using carbon dioxide and releasing oxygen. So some life at this point starts using oxygen. So this solar energy conversion process is known as photosynthesis. Again, some of the photosynthetically created oxygen recombine with organic carbon to recreate CO2 molecules. The remaining oxygen accumulated. What does accumulated mean? It means it kind of piled up. Thank you. In the atmosphere, touching off a massive ecological disaster with respect to early existing anaerobic organisms, which is organisms that do not use oxygen to survive. Basically, this was the first mass extinction. Things that weren't using oxygen were killed by all that oxygen in the air. As oxygen increased, CO2 decreased. In our notes, high in the atmosphere, some oxygen absorbed energy from the sun's ultraviolet UV rays and split to form single oxygen atoms. These atoms combining with the remaining oxygen to form ozone, molecules which are very effective at absorbing UV rays. The thin layer of ozone that surrounds Earth acts as a shield protecting the planet from UV light. The amount of ozone required to shield Earth from biologically lethal UV radiation, that means the amount needed to make life possible on Earth so that everything doesn't die, which are the wavelengths from 200 to 300 nanometers, is believed to have been in existence 600 million years ago. At this time, The oxygen level was approximately 10% of its present atmospheric concentration. Prior to this period, life had been restricted to the ocean. The presence of ozone enabled organisms to develop and live on land. Ozone played a significant role in the evolution of life on Earth and allows life as we presently know it to exist. To finish the notes up, skipping down, ozone naturally forms in the atmosphere, making life outside of the oceans, which is important because this is the kind of life we have, possible by shielding UV light. So then underneath 1 billion years here, we have life on land first appears. So to finish up, that happened. Simple multicellular organisms appeared shortly thereafter. The Cambrian explosion is where all sorts of life sprang into being. All sorts of lizards and a lot of different variety of animals just exploded into being. The amount of life on Earth just exploded after all of this happened. Right, now to finish up, what I have here is a short video that basically goes through everything we just went through, except in a much more graphically nice artistic way. Let's get started.
When the Earth first formed, the solar system was a violent place. Giant hunks of rock, metal, and ice slammed into the Earth's surface. As material collided and fused, there was intense heat and pressure. Matter vaporized on impact, leaving puddles of magma. Many of the collisions released water vapor and other gases, which gradually formed a blanket of steam around the early Earth. This thickened over time, becoming the first atmosphere. Some of the lighter gases, like hydrogen, leaked into space, but the denser steam collected and had a greenhouse effect, insulating, heating, and melting the surface of the planet. Over time, the Earth, in a process called differentiation, separated into layers and its crust cooled. Steam in the atmosphere collapsed and formed the oceans, covering much of the planet in chemical-rich waters. The young Earth settled down, but then something about the size of Mars is thought to have slammed into the planet, causing immense change. The two bodies coalesced and material was blasted outward. Debris from the impact formed a ring of matter that orbited the Earth and eventually became the Moon. The surface of the Earth became molten again from the intense heat, and the oceans reformed a steam atmosphere. When things finally cooled down again, the Earth's crust hardened and steam settled back down to reform the oceans. The Moon stabilized the Earth's tilt and helped to regulate climate. We don't know a lot of specific details about events during the Hadean Eon. There may have been several large asteroid or comet impacts, but none as big as the one that formed the Moon. Molten rock or magma oozed in some places and blasted out in others. Volcanoes on the land and seafloor released heavier gases like carbon dioxide and methane. There was still very little oxygen in the atmosphere. The oldest sedimentary rocks found in Greenland tell us a lot about Earth during the Archean Eon. There were oceans, lands, rivers, and beaches. Deep in the ocean, chemical-rich hydrothermal venting may have contributed to the first forms of life on Earth. These first microbial organisms are thought to have eventually spread throughout the Earth's oceans. Some microbes consumed hydrogen gas and others produced methane as a waste product. Biology began to affect the atmosphere. By about 3.5 billion years ago, stromatolites, mounds made by microbes, populated the world's beaches. Some early microbes used the sun's energy for photosynthesis, but the first photosynthesizers didn't release oxygen. However, by 2.8 billion years ago, life forms evolved that could use sunlight to split water molecules and release oxygen as a waste product. These were the cyanobacteria that still prosper in today's oceans. Most of the new oxygen combined with organic carbon to recreate carbon dioxide molecules, and some was used up in other chemical reactions. But eventually, oxygen flooded the atmosphere and touched off a massive ecological disaster for many of the anaerobic life forms that were poisoned by the abundance of oxygen. Other life forms adapted to thrive in the new conditions. The rock record offers proof. Oxidized iron compounds are reddish and rust-colored. In certain layers of sedimentary rock, they demonstrate the predominance of oxygen after 2.4 billion years ago. At this time, oxygen formed the ozone layer about 20 to 30 kilometers above the ground, protecting life on the Earth's surface from the sun's harmful ultraviolet rays. The rise of oxygen was coupled with a reduction in greenhouse gases like methane and carbon dioxide. So the Earth retained less of the sun's heat, and the global climate became significantly colder. There was mass glaciation and the Earth was encased in ice, often called a snowball Earth. The icy shell reflected sunlight, making it colder and colder, but volcanoes punched through the ice and volcanic carbon dioxide gradually built up in the atmosphere. When the greenhouse effect became strong enough, the planet warmed and the ice melted. Scientists think there were 3 or 4 huge glaciations over a period of time from 2.4 to 2.2 billion years ago, and then a period of about 1 billion years in which the atmosphere and climate were fairly stable. More recently, the planet experienced other snowball Earth events, but some life forms were able to survive the cold. The current Eon, the Phanerozoic, brought a proliferation of plant and animal life. Vascular plants with tissues for conducting water and nutrients colonized the land about 400 million years ago, and their photosynthesis caused oxygen levels in the atmosphere to rise. By about 300 million years ago, extensive forests covered the Earth. They pushed oxygen levels higher and enabled an even greater diversity of life. Biology, geology, astronomical events, and periodic variations in the Earth's position and orbit influenced the climate, but overall the atmosphere remained stable enough for life to persist.